Hey everyone, welcome to my DIY square drop camper build. This is going to be a series of videos put up here on YouTube for building your own square drop from start to finish. It's similar to a teardrop trailer, but instead of curves, it uses boxed edges. And this video specifically is about building the trailer, welding, painting, putting on the jacks, coupler, suspension, brakes, and all the electrical for the actual trailer itself. I've been researching teardrops for about 6 to 8 months, building my own anyway, and but I've wanted one for about 4 to 5 years. But the prices are just kind of insane, so I figured I'm just gonna build my own. I've acquired a lot of tools, and I've been doing a lot of woodworking around the house to to upgrade our lives basically and our furniture, and it's been going really well. I built a couple workbenches. My latest one, and now only one because I tore the other ones down, is a 4 by 8 foot workbench, and I will link the video of the Crafted Workshop guy that I got inspiration from and almost copied all of his plans. It's an amazing workbench, and I'm a big fan. So now that I've familiarized myself with the tools and what I need to do, it's time to build a camper. I'm getting married in 2 months, and I'm hoping to have it mostly completed by then. But then there's a little gap between the wedding and honeymoon, so hopefully by the time we go on the honeymoon, everything is done, so we can go on a trip in the summer with the kids. Should be a great time. I want to shout out to the TNTT forum and Tony Latham, who's very active on that forum and has even responded to my direct messages on Facebook, to ask for some help and guidance when I was first starting to source my materials. I will also have my Google Docs with all the materials that I've purchased for this build linked in the description below. So I want to thank my cousin Ryan for coming up this weekend and helping me build. You'll see him in this video, as well as Darnell, my buddy. He's an electrician, so he helped me with all the electrical. And then my buddy Carlo came today actually to help me rewire the 7-pin connector, because the one that I bought was not the one that's like the Nissan that I drive. So subscribe if you want to see my upcoming videos. It's going to be a long build series. I anticipate posting once a week, maybe twice a week. And don't hesitate to give me any pointers or criticism in the comments below. So cheers and enjoy. Welcome to my DIY square drop camper build series. You can see some of my initial designs here, and I'll be going over every step in building this from scratch, from the frame to the assembly and walls and everything in between. Before the welder arrived to weld up the frame, I went ahead and squared everything up since I had it cut to length. This is what the finished product looked like, which you will see by the end of the video. This is Miguel from MSD Welding and Fabrication here in the Bay Area. He did a fantastic job getting this all welded up. He was here for about 4.5 hours, and he got the entirety of the frame welded up, which is around 30 welds or so. I did my best to clean up every area that he would be welding before he got here, just so, to make the most of his time, he could just come in, start welding, and get it done as quick as possible. This worked out really well for both of us, as he did not live close to me, but I took advantage of his skills while I had him around. I purchased this rough steel from a place here in the Bay Area. They cut everything to length for me, and all I had to do was clean up where the welds would go, and once the welding was completed, get off the mill scale, clean off the mill scale, and then I began to paint. So you can see here he is getting the A-frame all welded up into a almost perfect triangle, but the center beam on the A-frame is certainly in the center, which is ideal for maneuvering on the trailer. I didn't record every bit of his welding, and I sped them all up here just for the sake of you watching this video. I assume that if you are watching this, you either know how to weld or you're gonna have someone teach you. This video here is of the completed welding job. As you can see, his welds look really good, and everything was better than I could have imagined. Sorry if you hear the wind in the background. We have a crazy storm going on here today. Anyway, those tabs that you can see on the corners, those are to mount the floor to. So here I am. I just started my grinding process. This is to scuff up all of the steel so that the paint or the primer and then the paint can adhere to it better and not just wipe off once you apply it. So you have to clean up and scuff up every single inch of this trailer. This process actually took a lot longer than I was anticipating, trying to get as much of the mill scale off and then eventually removing all of the oils and the dirt. I will say I think grinding is likely my least favorite out of all the things that I have done so far to get this trailer prepped and ready to begin building the actual cabin. Those lights that you see on there, they're weldable lights. The box is made of steel. So while Miguel was here, I had him weld those lights on so that I wouldn't have to worry about attaching them later with screws or me attempting and probably failing at welding that on myself. The steel that I use for this project is 2x3 11 gauge steel. It is going to be extremely durable, especially for what I'm going to be building on it. I anticipate in total, including the steel, that this will weigh probably around 15 to 1600 pounds, which is also why I have to get trailer brakes, because here in California, if your trailer is 1500 or more pounds, you are required by law to have brakes. So I went ahead and got the brakes as well as the Timbren axle-less suspension. The plate that I am grinding there is actually for the suspension. It needs to sit with that and flush so that you can drill a grade 8 bolt through it to attach it properly to the frame as well as on the outside of the frame. Here I'm back inside with the door closed because it was raining, and I flipped it over, sort of, as you can tell. It was a pretty terrible job, but I flipped the frame over so that I could get the bottom all grinded off in preparation for cleaning. Speaking of cleaning, so for this I looked online to see kind of what everyone would use, and I asked my cousin's boyfriend who works in automotive down in Southern California, and it was like brake fluid or acetone or isopropyl alcohol. So the easiest thing for me to get and the cheapest was the 91% isopropyl alcohol, and I just dumped 2 smaller boxes into a spray bottle, and then I used dust-free or lint-free rags to go over it and clean up all the steel, get all the oils off, because if you want your paint and primer to stick, you really need to get all the oils off. So next was the grinding of the welds. Right now in this orientation, the trailer is faced correctly as far as this is the top where the camper will sit. So his welds didn't really require much grinding, but you need to make sure that it's a flush surface so that your plywood can sit flat on this trailer bed. So I went through and just grinded with the angle grinder and a flat disc all of the welds down to be flush. You can see me using a square right there to see if there was any deviation when I set it down. And once everything was flat, we could go into painting. One thing that I unfortunately forgot was where the suspension goes. There are welds there as well on that L bracket, and it sits underneath. So once we flipped this over after we painted and primed and everything already, I had to grind down those welds and then re-primer and paint those little sections so that the suspension could sit flush to the steel. So now we're into the priming. The priming, as you can see, I'm not wearing my proper PPE, and that is because I did not have a respirator. And I figured, oh, this won't be too bad. Well, I had a headache all night. So always, always, always wear the correct PPE. You don't want any long-term side effects either, but the short-term ones are pretty terrible. So after getting it all cleaned up, we start priming, and I was using a self-etching primer from Rust-Oleum. I got it at Ace Hardware nearby. They're about $8 or $9 a can, and I ran out, so I had to go get extra. Always Trust me, always get extra. I had to go out not only for extra primer, but also extra bed liner later. It's not cool to have to stop your project because you forgot something or don't have enough of something. So this is the second coat that I'm doing here later that night. And after this, we let it dry and we go into the bed liner. And here we are. So I used two different kinds of bed liners. They were both Rust-Oleum. One is just the regular black bed liner, and the other one are these big turbo cans that have the actual textured bed liner. So the way it is oriented right now, the camper will sit directly on top of this area. So I did not use the textured bed liner, as I did not want any bumps or bubbles underneath when I put the plywood down and sealed it to the floor. That would just potentially cause an uneven floor. So on this side, I use the smaller cans, which is just a flat, basically a spray paint that hardens to be a bed liner to be protective. Now on the underside, that's when I used the big cans that had all the textured finish. And you can see here, this is now flipped over to be the underside. My cousin Ryan came out from Southern California to help me work on the project. He was a huge help in this process. So here we're both using a turbo can each to spray on the textured one, since that'll be more protective against rocks and any debris flying up from underneath. And I think this was our second or third, which was our final coat. And I had to do touch-ups here and there when we digged into it. That brings us to the brake hub and suspension installation. I did not show on camera us attaching the spindle arm to the Timbren axle suspension, but it's just 4 bolts. You got to make sure you got the left one on the left and the right one on the right. Here I'm greasing up the pieces that go into the brakes. Neither of us had ever done this before, so it was definitely a learning experience for both of us. And I plan on this week taking the trailer in as it is and having an expert look at it to make sure I didn't screw anything up, because this is pretty important to the entire makeup of the build. So once we had those parts greased up and inserted into the hub, we put that on. And then from there, we put on that piece. It's really heavy cast iron, and it attaches in there, and that's where you put your tire on. So we put in the rest of the pieces that are all greased up, and we're just tightening it and loosening it to try and get a good feel on movement of the wheel. I think we were a little off. I think it's a little tight, so I'll probably loosen it up a little bit before I take it in here in the next few days. So getting that pin in was kind of a pain in the ass, so I cut a little bit of that out. And so once we had the pin in, we just put the dust cap on, and everything was good to go. Unfortunately, I don't have any video of us attaching it to the frame. There was a lot of trial and error involved, and once we had the first one on, I was going to record the second one and kind of forgot. So it uses grade 8 bolts and lock nuts, so that's that. Here's my good buddy Darnell. He is an electrician, and I don't know anything about electrical. So he came over, and here he's separating the 7-pin wire. He's now measuring them in the junction box to where they're going to go. And then he's crimping them into place, or crimping them down with O-rings and then putting them into place in the junction box. He was a huge help with learning all this electrical stuff. He was here for many hours, for 2 days, showing us, Brian and I, how to do all the electrical. He is incredible. Thank you, Darnell. Now I've moved on to installing the conduit. This is pretty simple conduit. There's a 3/8 and a 1/2 inch, one inside the other. For the beginning part, I use the 1/2 inch from the junction box, and it's clamped into the junction box, and then out until everything splits off and goes in their separate directions. And then to the remaining bit of the conduit, I used the 3/8, since there's a lot fewer wires inside. Now I'm trying to determine exactly where I want to mount the junction box, and I'm screwing it into the frame here. using the bed liner to cover the holes. I didn't do this with all the holes, but I figured the ones that are going to be on the bottom, or at least close to the bottom, I should kind of cover them up a little bit with extra protection so it doesn't start to rust from the inside out if water manages to get up in there. Here you can see that I'm using these adhesive-backed zip tie holders with zip ties to run the conduit down past each break. Well, this is on each side. This is on one of the sides. It's got the blue brake line in there, and then it continues to the back lights. There will be side marker lights as well that I'll be installing at a later time before the floor, but for now, I really wanted to be able to take it on the road so I can go get the suspension and the tires checked out before I actually, continue building it once I get the A-OK. So here I'm crimping some wires to attach to the wire loom that I ran down from the junction box. I have never, well, I shouldn't say that. I have never crimped electric cables. I'm in the tech industry and work in data centers, so I certainly know how to make cables. However, heat shrink tubing and crimping, I really have no idea what I'm doing. Thank you to Darnell, who I watched very closely, so I had an idea. But I certainly did not crimp these back ones properly. However, they are solid, and because I use the solder butt connectors, so the solder is really holding them in place together. So I'm not worried about that. It's going to be inside the wire loom, and it's never going to be touched. And there is extra wire on each side, about 1.5 feet of wire on each side. So if the time comes when I need to rewire everything, it's not going to be a big deal. Especially because I won't have to go under the camper because it's coming right out of the side, right there in the rear. So once I'm done, as you can see here, I'm putting on the wire loom just to make sure that it's protected. And then we'll go on to me crimping the brakes. Sorry for the weird orientation of this video, but I've had to put the GoPro on its side, on its little stand, so that it could capture me crimping. This time I did it properly. I crimped in the middle, and then heat shrink it down, melted the solder inside to connect the wires. And here I am doing the ground cable, because these electric brakes have 2 cables coming out through the same color. It doesn't matter which way you use them. One is ground and one is to activate the brakes. So, and you can see I'm using a little bit of grease there on the connection point so that for the ground wire, because I do not want any issues coming up where it starts to corrode. So this is kind of a funny video. There is sound. I will let myself take it away with testing the lights. At that moment, you could actually hear the brakes engaging. And do the signals, yeah. Hold on, do the blinkers again, one at a time. Signals are backwards. Oops. Obviously, I went back and fixed that. I did it at the junction box. Speaking of the while I installed this coupler, when I was installing the junction box, I was using the code that came with the diagram that came with the 7-pin connector. Unfortunately, it was different than the actual Nissan that I drive, the truck. So we had to go back and redo all of the junction box after we tested it the first time and nothing worked. That test was successful because we had switched everything out. So the coupler is a pretty simple install. Just a couple of grade 8 bolts in there. I may end up changing those out, we'll see. And then this is the rolling jack stand in the front. And that should do it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more, like and subscribe and all that jazz. See you on the next one.